I remember seeing this article pop up on Facebook a long time ago. I was actually able to track it down finally about our textiles, because
Oh.
now you're seeing it more and more. I feel like they're using our patterns and our
Yep.
and the inable really and incorporating that into
Yeah.
clothes and modern fashion. Which, before we get into these, what do you guys think about that and modernizing, I guess, our traditional wear?
My thoughts on that is, um, it's been quite simple. Like, if it's ugly, then no. If it looks good, then I'll support it. Like,
That's
that's
subjective, though.
basically it. It is very subjective. It's definitely
I
subjective to
think
me.
that's
Um,
that makes it
but
pretty plain.
yeah, no, because at the end of the day, like, that's those are just my feelings, right? But if we were to incorporate like cultural appropriation, then that gets all messy, and I don't really want to think about that, because at the end of the day, the person, he just wants to, or he or she just wants to make a living, right? And that's essentially what our ancestors were doing. Now, for me, if I were to get angry about it and be like, "Hey, man, you're stealing our thing," or whatever, if they were Igorot, then totally support them. If they're Igorot and
Yeah.
they're making ugly fashion, I don't think I support them, to be honest. If it's good, it looks good to me. It's totally cool. But again, going back to basically what we were just talking about, and how um people are monetizing certain things, it does dabble into the realm of like exploitation. So if I
Oh
were
God. Yeah.
but the thing is, if I were to get mad at somebody who's not Igorot, and he's stealing our textiles or whatever, like, it goes into the whole debate of like, is it okay for them to use it even if they're Igorot? So then that comes into like into the debate of like, that's kind of like, it's in the realm of racism, essentially. Just because they're not this race, they're not this ethnicity, it's wrong for them to do that. La la la. You know what I mean? So to me, it's kind of like, that's where it becomes like a slippery slope or a sticky issue. So it just boils down to, just, if it looks nice, then yeah. If it doesn't
Yeah,
look good, then boo.
that was going to be my follow-up question, since you already brought it up. How you guys felt about it, and does it make a difference if they're Igorot or not Igorot? Mark?
Oh,
The monos.
Okay,
What do you
me.
guys think?
Yeah. this there's all kinds of ways I could go with this in terms of the way I think about it, but yeah, I'm in there with, if they're good, like, and they're finding a way to like modernize our own stuff.
Mhm.
I'm all for it. If they're not Igorot, and let's say they're just Filipino from another area, and they appreciate the culture, and they love the textiles, and they love the way they look,
Mhm.
I think that's cool.
Yeah.
But I think either way, if you're Igorot or non-Igorot, that try to find out a little bit more about the textiles themselves. What does it take to make them, for example? Who's making them? These kind of things. And like, what do the symbols mean? What do the colors mean? Right? So those things are important. And I think, if you, especially, well, Filipinos in general, try and do the research, because I think in academia they have, it's there.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
It's
there.
available now.
And I think it's going back to that,
Mhm.
how what I mentioned earlier about appropriation in general. So like every step, whether it be music, whether it be textiles, dancing, like, if you're gonna use it, look into it and learn more about it before you do what you do, and then it'll have, your clothes will have more soul. It won't just be like, hey, this is a cool design.
Mhm.
I think the indigenous people over there who dance the eagle dance, yeah, okay, that looks cool, and I'm just gonna turn that design into like a jacket and sell it and make money if you know. It, I think that most designers these days do, especially I would say most of the modern designers now do, because they recognize that it's special. special to us. I haven't seen, not at least not myself, haven't seen too many examples of people just borrowing. Only in the '90s when they were doing certain things, they were just like, "Hey, that's Filipino, so that must be like they just would wear it just because it's Filipino. So okay, yeah, that's cool."
Yeah.
And the only reason I had an issue of it back then in the '90s is because people were kind of like talking about us and using aspects from our culture as if our culture was dead and we weren't really alive anymore. We were like,
Yeah.
like it wasn't alive.
Hmm.
And so that part kind of bugged me a little bit. It's like, no, there are still people who still wear these things, like the wanus, the baag,
Hmm.
the G-string. There are still people who wear the tapis, there are still people who speak the language, who still do the rituals, all that stuff. And the culture is very much alive, people. It's not just something that's like it's dead, so you just borrow and take whatever you want, from it. You have to be a little bit more sensitive about it and just be thoughtful when using those things. And I think that's fair. I think that's fair, right? It's not getting all overboard about it, like,
Yeah, and being
hey, you're from
ignorant.
my culture,
Yeah,
bam, like that kind of thing. Yeah, it's more than just being angry.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, for sure, for sure.
Yeah. Jay?
I think you got to be very tempered with your anger. I mean, because there's a lot of things that are just BS in the world already, and choose what your battles are. Um, I think that if you're passionate about it and you have the energy for it, and you see that something's quite wrong, it's appropriate to be vocal. I think there's a difference though within just yelling, because if you're just gonna yell at a person and just try to shame them, that
Hmm.
doesn't work. That's just
Hmm.
gonna get another person to shut down. You don't have dialogue,
Hmm.
but you do have to find what's some common ground if you want to have a dialogue with someone and said, hey, I'm just curious about where you learned that stuff from, and where did you catch that? There's some patterns there that look very familiar to me. And if they open up with the conversation, this is why I found it. Don't you think people really need to know? I mean, are you just trying to be an artist, rendering your own, interpretation of something? Because it does come from somewhere, and I know where it comes from. And maybe if they have a personal relationship, they know somebody, like, then they might actually consciously think about, like, hey, I got to honor these people. If they know a little bit more of the story, then it might be something that they might find meaningful. But I think that it's up to us to share that. Back in the day when we used to see people, like, doing our Igorot dances, for all of these, like, Filipino cultural nights, and you just see it's all whacked. So I remember, like, before, I just say, oh, just we just stare and not look, and then eventually we started working on teaching some groups, and that still continues today with the Igorot who go to the universities. They do a lot of teaching, whatever they can, and they'll draw on
Yeah.
the resources that they have. And Mark tends to be a big resource for a lot of people, and for these things. But they will, if you have if it's part of who you are and you want to honor it and take the risk of honoring it, knowing that, hey, you might get pushback for some people, because they're gonna think. Sometimes people think in a very pan pan Asian, pan Filipino view of things, and
Hmm.
that they try to embrace the whole thing, and say that that's part of who they are.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, if you're willing to just say that, then I think
Well,
it's
especially if
appropriate
you're
then
born
to be
abroad.
willing to study.
If you're second generation born abroad,
Yeah.
you're
Right.
definitely more than likely you're gonna do that, versus like if you're born in the Philippines, like you're just gonna
Correct.
be
Correct.
mainly about where you're from.
That's true. And
Correct.
it's
And
not necessarily a bad thing too, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
Mhm,
It is what it is.
because like what Mark was saying, like that pan Asian, pan Filipino identity is really important for people abroad
mhm.
who, especially for people that haven't grown or lived in the Philippines. But that
Yeah.
also doesn't speak to the fact, or it speaks to the fact though that they should also be aware and I don't want to say like aware or woke or whatever, but recognize the differences in the culture and recognize that they're like, yeah, sure, be proud to be a Filipino, be proud that you're in Canada, in the States, because your parents, basically fought tooth and nail to come here, but also like recognize that there are differences because there is history in how certain cultures are seen as other, and yet you're trying to lump them all
Yes.
together. That's almost as ignorant as ignoring the fact that there have been these cultures. So
Yeah, yeah, true. Sorry to cut in, Jay. I
yeah,
just
sorry, sorry, Jay.
No, no, no. I mean,
That's
because it's a very rich kind of topic, and the nuances that we have with all of
Yeah.
our identities and where we come from, and how I mean, y- if it's something that is a source of deep pride for us, or sometimes with some folks, there is a there's a cultural shame, and they because they don't have um, other things that make it look positive for them.
hmm
So
hmm
Mm.
um,
Like
yeah. Speaking of that, like, sorry. You-
yeah, yeah,
so-
go ahead.
oh yeah. Speaking of that, I kind of wanted to, well, because there's that other side of the coin too, where you look at something and you look at our clothes, and the question was, what do I think about that? Going back to that question that Gerald was saying, and sometimes I think we have to think of why we like or dislike something.
mhm,
Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Why would I not like it when it's my own people's
yeah,
colors and my own people's stuff?
yeah.
Yeah, so like, for example, like, there's a little bit of that feeling sometimes, like when I remember when we were younger, like in the 90s and stuff, like when they saw the full on Igorot, not the chaleco, but the actual full on the modernized sports jacket that was Igorified, right? So it had like all the colors and stuff, yellow, and most people, like the younger kids, would be like, "Oh my god, that's the colors are all loud and mixed and stuff," and it just it it wasn't to their palate, and as I grew older, I started to think about that. Well, why wouldn't I like that? Because when I see like Africans and wearing all their colors, it looks good, and I'm down. That's their thing, That's their thing. I might not be able to
Mhm.
wear that, but that's their thing. But when it comes to wearing my own stuff, like wearing a
Right.
whole full-on jacket like that with all the loud colors and stuff, the yellows, particularly the yellows, the yellow, black, green, red, right, white, like all those mixed colors and stuff. Like when I was younger,
You
I
mean
would
like
have thought, "Oh my god, yeah, like that," but in jacket form. But when I was younger, I would have thought, "Man, that's so many
It's
colors to be
garish.
wearing,"
Garish.
Yeah.
It's
Classic.
yeah,
But
yeah.
so part of what I'm saying here is like we gotta also think about, like, why wouldn't we like that?
Mm, true.
What's
Right.
driving our
And then
mentality to not
there
like
is
that
a
initially?
thing
Because
about
I love it
internalized
now.
oppression.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
is a thing about internalized oppression that I think can run unconscious with folks. All of these things about who you are that then you'd somehow deny. Um, that's definitely a real thing, in the face of other people's privilege. So, a lot of that's unconscious. That's the stuff that you have to do a lot of really inner work. So that's a really great question that you pose there. If I don't like it, why? What about it? You
That's
know,
definitely
um,
Yeah.
something I can identify with because most of
mhm.
my like adolescent life and Gerald can attest to this, the fact that like we'd always be forced, like especially when we first came to Canada, my parents
Mhm.
would always bring us to like to be back. They bring us to like
Mhm.
Baguio Pine, all these like organizations and stuff,
Mm.
just to like for my
Expose
parents.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of like the secondary function of it, but it was
Hmm.
for my parents. It was for them to, get a basically try to. It was like a coping mechanism, right? Like they were trying to,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
new country and stuff.
Feel that.
Trying
Right.
to, yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Trying to connect with the community. here and whatnot. And to me, I've always like tried to. I never liked it to be honest. I never liked going to Reebok.
Yeah,
and
that's
and
fine. Yeah.
it's hilarious because now like people can point to the fact that, oh yeah, you're all about this, all about that. Like even to me internally, like I'm thinking like I'm so riled up on all these cultural issues, and even on my social media posts, like most of my personal stuff is always like talking about Igorot stuff. Whereas like talk to me when I was 16 or whatever, I you know, for me my focus at that time was like, you know, I want to be cool, right? So
Yeah.
to me,
Yeah.
like going to be back, like gong playing and participating, to me that wasn't cool. Whereas nowadays it's like, oh, I want to do this because it's, you know, I'm trying to pick up on my culture and stuff. So to me, that's like it's just a funny thought to me because now like I'm here like talking about, oh yeah, cultural appropriation. I don't like it when people do this, but like man, like before like I wouldn't even care. I wouldn't be aware about this because at that time I didn't care about my like my parents like opinions and stuff. And like now that I'm like trying to be all active with Bebop and trying to be active with my culture, my parents are just doing their own thing. Like they're really happy that they're happy that like they're happy to share with my aunties back home. They're like, oh yeah, Ido's doing this with his
Oh, wow.
friends and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's like, oh whatever, he's living his life or whatever, you know.
Yeah, I can totally relate. I
Yeah,
totally
I find
relate
it
to that when I was
definitely because
younger.
I find it for me that I'm more like gung ho about like, oh yeah, weaving or gangsa, even though my dad's the one who knows how to play the gangsa, but like you know, he's at the end of the day he doesn't care. Right?
Well, it's funny because yeah, I felt exactly the same way when I was younger. But then once I started to actually do the performances and dances and stuff, that's when I really started to get that connection with the community and with the culture.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I still tried to ignore it,
Yeah,
but yeah, just I don't know, I couldn't ignore it for that much longer. I guess so.
I guess.
No, you can't. You can't ignore the call of your ancestors, man. There's no. That's my personal belief. It's like the ancestors will keep on calling, you know, and until you finally listen.
I can definitely agree with that, man, for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And so just to go back to the original article that actually got me thinking about that question, original question. So this article was done by, what is this, Metro Style Fashion.
Is Jay, are you there still?
You remember that? Do you guys know this?
Metro.
Hold on, I'm just trying to see if Jay's still there because he's frozen.
Oh, he is frozen.
At least from my camera.
Frozen for a while.
Jay.
Oh,
So
there he is.
yeah, I'm back.
Yeah,
did you hear the audio at least?
No, it just pixelated. That's what it sounded like.
Oh.
I'm like, uh-oh.
What's the article, Dre?
Okay.
Metro.
So